Welcome. Welcome to All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. I am Reverend Steve Wilson. I have served churches in this area since 2003, and I'm very happy to be here today. We're going to have a coffee hour inside today because it's cold over there. We're going to try to maintain social distances. We're going to have our remain masks on for today. These are precautions that we're all boringly aware of at this point in time, I'm sure. So I have the privilege of talking, so I don't have to wear a mask. It's probably why I'm here. But thanks for being here. And we thank Julia for being here and playing our music today, and Dan for running around, who's my contact here, for running around and saving the building and doing all that Dan does with tech, and our assistants. And welcome to all those people who are home at Zoom. So today's theme is about pursuing happiness. And I just love that phrase, right? It's core to America's both mission and sort of delusion about itself that it was available to everyone. This church, of course, like all Unitarian churches in this country, sits on ancestral native lands that we took. And we sort of, let's just take a moment to honor that our history, as noble as it is, has had some blind spots in that. And we attempt to move forward in this world in an anti-racist way, and creating the beloved community that is what Unitarian Universalism should be. Let's take a moment just to think about the legacy of both good and bad in our movement and in this church in particular. Today's about happiness, which I think has kind of a bouncy quality to the very word. And if Jefferson and the boys fought for our right to pursue it, today's sermon is a little bit like a detective noir, following that story around to see what it might actually be. That's the theme of where we are at. So I invite us to pause and listen to Julia's prelude from Mozart. Thank you. Kate is going to come up and light our chalice for us while I think we all share reading the chalice words. Please join me if you would. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Here we are. Our reading comes from Daniel Gilbert's book, Stumbling Upon Happiness, which I sort of drew the sermon from. And he quotes both Sigmund Freud and Blaise Pascal. Freud says, the question of the purpose of human life has been raised countless times. We all ask it constantly. It has never yet received a satisfactory answer, and perhaps it does not admit of one. We will therefore, Freud says, turn to the less ambitious question of what men, I'm including women here, show by their behavior to be the purpose and intention of their lives. Freud says, what do they demand of life and wish to achieve in it? The answer can hardly be in doubt, he says. They strive after happiness, they want to become happy, and they want to remain so. We can agree with that. Pascal says, all men and women seek happiness. This is without exception. Whatever means they employ, they all tend towards this same end. The will never takes the least step but to this object. This is the very motive and action of every person. And perhaps by experience most convincingly as Anne Frank, it is Anne Frank who says, we all live with the objective of being happy. Our lives are all different and yet the same. There we are. Please join me singing our opening hymn, number 208, Every Time I Feel the Spirit. 208 in our traditional Singing the Living Tradition hymnals. 208. Time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. On the mountain, my God spoke, and the all around me look so trying. Ask my God if all is well. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. The river Jordan runs right cold chill in the body, my soul. Wait but one tree on the track runs to heaven and right back. It's a time I feel the Spirit moving in my soul. I will pray. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Welcome. Our congregational covenant is printed in your order of service. Please join me. In this house, we covenant with one another to create a community built on a foundation of love, to work together to promote equality, justice, and to peace, accepting responsibility for our individual acts, to stand on the side of love, embracing the liberation of oppressed minorities and working to end discrimination and unjust privilege, to communicate with kindness and support, and to serve with compassion and commitment, to listen respectfully and value our diversity as a source of our collective strength, to learn to grow together, generously sharing our time, talents, and treasures, to celebrate the joys of discovery from the wonder of youth to the wisdom of age, to openly share our laughter and our tears, showing reverence for the divine in all that there is. Way back before anyone here was a member, there was an old offertory tradition in this church where they would collect the money and then they would take it outside and they would throw it up in the air, and whatever went up to God, the heavens could keep, and whatever came back down, they used for the support of the church. So we encourage everyone to give generously for the life and work of this fine institution. I think we should add to the covenant of a lot of the churches the goal of keeping the building alive and well too. That would be good. Thank you, Julia. For the sake of clarity, I'm gonna work with accepting Freud and Pascal's and Anne Frank's collective premise that we all seek happiness and we work to keep it. Wanting to be happy is one of the few things we might even dare claim to be an almost irrefutable part of human nature. We could get into that. I don't necessarily want to. Freud's observation is also probably the most straightforward thing he ever said. And the best part of Freud's statement is that as clear as he is, it's just as clear that it's difficult to get happy, right? Happiness is an elusive, it's a big word for a difficult concept. We're all with him, I think. If you're anywhere near the center of the bell curve on happiness, you probably would have to pause to answer the question about whether you were happy or not. And even after you answered that question in whatever vague way you probably could, you'd probably wonder if you got it right and you really were that level of happy or not. It's hard to find, it's hard to define, it's hard to hold on to. So if it is what we want, and if it is a challenge to describe, never mind find, and we all get fidgety at about minute 13 in a sermon, I think I better get started. If the premise that everyone's happiness stands, and I think we can generally say that, we would best in the modern sense of investigators and scientists determine that our chief suspects would have to be the behavior that people most often choose to engage in their life to make them happy. It's the only logical thing to do. In order to figure out how we might do that, I've invited in Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert onto the case. You've probably seen him. He's on a lot of those investment ads talking about planning for your future. And just for fun, I want you to think of this sermon as being done in like black and white noir color. So our pursuit begins with Professor Gilbert. He walks into my office. He's got an armful of books and studies in my imagination. And he's been on the search for what happiness and how one stumbles upon it. We start brainstorming up a list of how one gets to find happy, and pretty fast we go bouncing back and through what people do. I say that people try to find love and to surround themselves with those they love. Gilbert marks that down on our little board, and he says they also try to make more money and get more security. I add they look for more power and status. And he says they also give up those pursuits at certain times for a more comfortable life. Good observations, we agree. That's sort of a good starting list. Gilbert adds people also ingest drugs and alcohol, both strong and mild, prescribed and otherwise, to see if they can find happiness. And I add, and they refine, accurately and not, the very nature of what the world is like in order to find it. They reframe it in a religious sense, I say. Gilbert says that's good. They do. People create delusional realities to live within. Different sides of the same coin. We decide to test our most tantalizing and easy to test leads. We decide we're going to catch a cheap flight to Vegas, and we're going to watch people try to break the casino and ingest the right drug and find Mr. or Mrs. Right, or at least Mr. and Mrs. Right now. We walk by the fountains in Vegas and we're taking in all the information you can take in. There's kind of a pulse there, we both agree with this, and there's an energy, and we concur that the route to happiness Vegas offers might be the quickest way to transform your head to be happy, maybe. And with many of the shiny things that to engage and to play with, there's a joy, there's a levity, there's also a sadness here, but there's at least the opportunity for a fast happiness. Gilbert and I both concur that happiness, or at least animated spirits, can be found in a place like this. However, after a few days of hanging around there and looking at our tally sheets, we lead to the conclusion that the amount of stressed out and despondent people and the faces that we see lead us to believe that maybe drugs, the excitement and hope of games of chance, pretty things that can dazzle, do not appear a very solid way of staying happy. We've kind of come to that conclusion. And standing in the neon glare, I note in my little detective notebook for later reviewing, it's worth noting that people are driven hard enough to find happiness that they pursue these short-term solutions long beyond the point that it's clear that that is good for them. Gilbert says that's interesting. Okay. The quick fix connections of fast money and cheap love may be eliminated as a true and long-term source for happiness, but we still need to check out the connection between happiness and more stable money and resources. I pretend in my tough guy voice, because it's a noir film, Dan, let's check out the next suspect. Gilbert and I, trench coats, sort of imagining magnifying glasses in hand like Sherlock Holmes, we decide that the next way to test the connection between happiness and comfort and money is to visit a variety of poor and rich countries, cultures, communities. We hop planes to Ethiopia, Dubai, Malibu, the Philippines, and Chicago's middle-class suburbs. From the beautiful tree-lined streets of Malibu to the crowded ones in Manila, we take it all in. We go on a little tour, me wandering around talking to people as I do, and the diligent professor frequently dropping his gaze down into his briefcase thick with notes. On one of those plane flights home, I say, Dan, this is a tough one, but what my eye and my gut tells me is that many of the people that live in poor nations truly remain a little bit less content, less secure. I'm going to just go ahead and say less happy than those in moderately wealthy nations. This is, of course, subjective and varied. And Gilbert interrupts me. Stop it, Steve. You're onto the right data. There is support that suggests loosely that common sense observation that those who seem to spend time trying to meet their basic needs and trying to bail themselves out of difficult situations or crises don't necessarily self-identify on surveys as often as those with more security. However, he adds, when you look at even more of these self-reporting surveys, those who live in wealthy community, the facts support that the wealthy are not markedly or significantly happier than those who have just their basic needs met. Gilbert pulls out a slew of studies over the tray and the airplane table. He says the facts remain a correlation between one's happiness and one's basic needs being met can be said. However, after one reaches a modicum of economic stability, phrase he uses, there's a steady diminishing correlation between happiness increasing alongside the amounts of wealth that are accumulated. To which I respond, So believing you can buy your way out of sick, tired, hungry, or scared is not entirely an illusion. No, my smart professor friend says. One might suggest from the conclusion of our tour and the background research on money and happiness that it appears money can keep us from some of the conditions that prevent unhappiness without granting us the ability to really gain happiness. I scratched in my little notebook. Although there was an undeniably pervasive evidence that money does not buy happiness, people of all economic backgrounds still hunger after money. Why is that? Gilbert says our next suspect in the source of happiness pursuit, let's see if we can find romantic love as at least a way to get happy. He says it's a surefire way to at least get happy temporarily. Let's test it out. Yep. I say if the person that you've tagged as the title of being romantically involved with does not initially make you happy, you've probably picked the wrong horse. Dan, let's assume for a minute that people are not always picking the wrong horse or the wrong person, and that there's at least a good percentage of people who fall in love and get married to at least someone close to the right person for them. That seems reasonable, he says. Then I say, let's see whether finding the right person and the security of partnership, and while we're at it, we'll add kids into the mix, often comes with making us happy. Okay, Gilbert says, that's the choice most people in life make. And we begin walking the suburban middle-class streets, peeking in windows, we get in trouble for this once, and looking around at seeing what's going on. Having surveyed the scene, we stop to sit under a curb with a street light. We open up our laptops and we formulate our ideas and look at the data. It seems, I say, that the closest thing to a conclusion there is about marriages and families is that they differ in their ability to bring happiness to those involved. Gilbert responds, you know, Rev, look at what the combination of these 4 studies show that he pulls out. He scatters studies out on the sidewalk. Couples start to blow away. They basically show that happiness follows in some kind of pattern. He looks at these 4 studies, he says, and concur that in some, painting with the broadest of brushes, he says that happiness goes down almost immediately from the time people get married, and then up again when their kids are in elementary school, and then down again when their kids become teens, and then up again when the nest empties. So the common feeling of empty nest syndrome, we both chuckle, is giddiness. Gilbert chimes in, here's more, check this out. It is true, parents record a trustworthy pleasure we can believe we can call happy or closely approximating it when they look wistfully at or forward to cooing babies and wedding days and Susie's first time at bat. Yes, I say they do that. But in the day-to-day, moment-to-moment way we live, Gilbert goes on, it seems that when happiness is measured in the everyday journey people take in their lives, spending time with children for parents ranks in their studies somewhere between housework and exercise. He goes on. The sum of evidence reveals people generally describe their kids as a source of joy and happiness, even more a source of pride and purpose. But the studies also show, just not now. Gilbert says, smiling, right, I follow. So looking at him, I say for confirmation, it won't be alone having kids and finding a partner that makes you happy. It seems that way, he says. We find ourselves walking by a synagogue in the Chicago neighborhood, which prompts me to say the traditional answer to, at least in the Western world, the religious answer is that the source of happiness is rooted in our innate connection to some perfect existence or source of bliss, most often called God, some heavenly realm. And a more divine place that we can reach brings us happiness. Gilbert says, something only the eyes and heart of faith can taste. I add, the traditional answer is that our problem in finding happiness or holding on to it is that we're built of both spirit and matter and fall prey to being distracted by lowly matters. That's the common theology. We're corrupted, so to speak, by our material form and our material wants. Gilbert says, in this mindset, then, true happiness is built upon cultivating a deeper relationship with the eternal realm. Yes, I respond, that's about right. And Gilbert says back quietly, this could be true. It's also really difficult to study that. Let's pot this one off to the side for a minute, not eliminate it as a suspect in the true source of happiness. I like that, I say. There's something deep and rich about religion getting you happy that's just hard to test or prove. We returned to the office from our journey. I put my feet up on the desk, a little frustrated. Gilbert stands above me, fidgeting around, restless with files and studies all over the place. Exasperated, I say, if we all want to be happy, we've agreed upon that, and nothing people seems to choose makes them consistently happy or leads them consistently to happiness, something is wrong. Gilbert says, right. He goes on, I found out that we might have suspected all along that behaviors and the pursuits and even the people that people want to gather around them, thinking that will give them happiness, is not the same as happiness itself. I agree, I say. We could add that those with enough resources and political freedom to choose this are the group we're working at. We agree that that's the case. Let's deal only with those people who have enough resources to have some kind of common purpose and order and control over their lives. Gilbert has this enlightened smile across his face. He begins to shuffle papers and paste things on the wall. I go out for a cup of coffee. He mutters under his breath, we think will make us happy. We think will make us happy. The things, he clearly is on to something. When I return from my little break, he has this sly, knowing smile. I got it, or at least partially, I think I got it, the professor says. He says, when you look at all the studies and our own experiences in our journey, he says, it seems that the way our brains work and the way that meets the world, there's an important thing about happiness that we miss. Quit holding out, I say. Sit down. This is a bit odd, he says. We are much less likely, he says, and by that I mean we are much, much less likely and capable of making choices that will make us happy in the future than we think we can. I say, a bit puzzled. Can you say that again? He says, we are much less likely, and by that I mean we are much, much less likely and capable of making choices that will lead us to happiness than we think we can or we do. Okay, still a little confused, I say. The future, he says, is far too unpredictable for our capacity to predict what will make us happy, making a fundamental difference for us as we arrive in the future. I say. Our skills at predicting, he goes on, never mind navigating our future selves that will make us happy, are too weak. The distance between the future and the present too great. Look at the data, he gets excited to say, showing me these charts. Our happiness, which we are inclined to think of, will be found attached to the thing or the things that we, even the fulfillment we get at it. is much more dependent upon the aiming than the achieving, he says. Huh, I shrug. Happiness is built more on the hope than the get, I add in a question format. Happiness is built more on the hope than the get, he says. It seems that for our brains, it is simply gratifying to exercise control. I twist my head like a dog, trying to grasp it all. The act of steering one's own life, Gilbert says, like a captain might find pleasure steering his or her ship, is in itself a source of pleasure. Okay, I can feel that. He says, struggling to make his point clear, regardless of what port of call anyone might choose to pursue, the rudder in our own hand feels good. We like control, I say. Happiness has something to do with control, I think. That rings true. Yeah, but it's not just that, Gilbert says. We enjoy thinking about the future, too. For example, holding up his laptop, I look at this study. When people are asked whether they want to eat a fancy French meal now, soon, or later, most people postpone the eating of that meal about a week. Gilbert says, I've come to believe that they do this because this choice offers them time enough to look forward to the meal. He goes on, we instinctively take into account the pleasure we have when we look forward to something, when we set a goal. And in a way, we do that to extract more pleasure from the very thing itself in the hope and the wait. Huh. It's been assessed here, pointing to a graph taped to the water cooler, that our brains spend about 12% of time on the future, he makes the point to say. Look, he says, looking at this paper, he says, it's also much more likely that our brains are inclined to imagine good things happening to us than the bad things that often do. Much more realistically, we think good things are coming our way than the future actually delivers. Huh, I say. And he says because our brains are sneaky and silently smart about their own pursuit of pleasure and happiness, it is a conspiracy of selective memory that takes place to encourage overtly optimistic expectations for our lives. He says this is the very instinct that causes us to fill photo albums with birthday parties and not romantic breakups. It's obvious, I say. Dan goes on, it's our brain's self-interest and tendency to think good things are more likely to happen than they do. I say, Dan, you know, it's funny you say that because someone told me one time that happiness is found in the waiting room for happiness. And I never really got that till now. Gilbert injects with enthusiasm, our memory, which both courts and magicians have long proven to be untrustworthy, and our imagination about what is to come, which is forced to deal with literally tons of missing information that the future hasn't brought to us yet, is forced to leave out and fill in important information without warning us it is doing so. Okay, I slide in. In short, we tend to be overly optimistic of our expectations and that what interests us today will interest us in the future. Think about the kid, he says, holding up his fingers in quotations, who is so psyched that they can drive a car. Are you, he says, psyched each day that you can drive your car? No, I am not, I say. But I wouldn't want that capacity to be taken away, I say. Exactly, Gilbert says, his eyebrows. In summary, our happiness, which we are inclined or even disposed to think of as attached to the thing that we are aiming at, is much more dependent on the pleasure and control we have of the aiming than the getting. So, Dan, you're telling me that we care a lot about the future, but we don't give a whit about the future we fought to create once we've arrived there. Yes, roughly, Gilbert says. And ironically, with another wry smile, it's a bit comical in our own pursuit of creating happiness that we misremember the past. we misperceive the present, and we misimagine the future. So the real answer is, as I suspect, that no one thing works to get us happy. Yes, he says. I understand you're telling me that our brains sort of fool us into believing that we will want this or that kind of future, but we cannot realistically know that. But I still feel compelled to the returning question that we put aside a while back about chasing things and the deconstruction of all that. So let's put that aside. Gilbert hesitates and says, the fact seems to suggest that we believe things to be true that we do not necessarily find true. I think we've all experienced that we shoot for transient pleasures. And like a sage might say, we've looked for unlimited happiness in limited things. Yeah, we've already established that, he says. I say it's sort of true. I can be absolutely convinced that the next material thing or the next pretty person around the corner is going to make me happy for some length of time. And yet I know that's true and not going to work, but it's still the first place I turn. The first thing, he says, particularly living in America as we sit here, is to know that a society reliant on constant economic change, it's hard to find happiness when the pursuit of other things is always there. The moving targets, I say. Yes. You got it. Then it seems a reliable happiness may best be pursued by a jump or a shift in consciousness to the mental discipline to reduce that and to see things more clearly. Gilbert says, yeah, you're the theologian. That sounds right. It's a spiritual truth of so many traditions, I say, not to get too caught up in the stuff. Gilbert says, it might be wise to suggest to your parishioners that the next time they think that some new thing or something will make them happy, remind them that it best only might make them happy. Okay, I say. It makes me wonder if my grandfather, who was one of the happiest men I know, kept at least one eye on what he declared he really wanted and worked to ensure that that didn't get out of hand. Got it, Gilbert says. That's a smart man. And enjoying the control he actually had in pursuing the things he could reach. I say, wisdom. I write in my detective book. In the end, it's quite clear that after pursuing happiness by following the most obvious of leads, down the beautiful boulevards and lavish homes, taking its footsteps into romantic getaways and peeking into the windows of homes with good marriages and playful kids, we find the evidence that happiness can live there. But it lives there to the degree that the subjective realities of the people in those rooms are trained to see happiness as being there and continue to hold those things as being satisfying. Gilbert says that's well said. He goes on, I think that is as close as we're going to get today. Much as we might quietly wish and chase it everywhere, happiness is if anywhere, lives between our ears and beneath our chests, and in that invisible place where our attitude meets our emotional life, meets our reality. Elementary, my dear, Gilbert says. My last note is Jefferson and the boys said happiness was something that we did not have the right to, but we had the right to pursue. Maybe they were on to something. Amen. Amen. And now we sing. Let It Be a Dance, 311 in our hymnals. 311. I invite you to stand in body and or simply in spirit. 311. a long dance. I'm tired. I believe it is the third most thing you can do to do joys and concerns. The first one is light the chalice. That's the first Unitarian most common thing. The second is sing, what am I? No, not hymns. No, what's our big hymn? Spirit of Life. Spirit of Life. And then the third is joys and concerns. So turn the microphone on and invite anyone who wishes to share what's on their hearts or minds to do so. And we also invite our Zoom community in to do that as well. Hey.
Good morning. So Jim is in the hospital. He went in yesterday after 3 days of rapid heart rate. We thought it was AFib. It turns out it's more of it's different. It's a valve thing or something like that. So I believe he's going to get home today. I believe he's going to need a pacemaker. But at this point, he's comfortable.
Morning, church. Well, I'm sorry to hear that about Jen. I'll send some love and light and prayer his way for sure. Let me see it, Joy. I'm just going to go with the joy today. I'm so grateful for Julia and your music. What a beautiful thing. Thank you so much. And what is happiness? You know, I'm tempted to do that. Little happiness comes in perpetual motion. Love is like a little boat upon the sea. Everything is a part of everything anyway. You can be happy if you let yourself be. And I love that. I love you brought that to mind. What is happiness? A very good thing to ponder. Thank you so much.
Abraham Lincoln said everybody is about as happy as they want themselves to be or make themselves or believe themselves to be.
Hi, my name is Rob. David, would you light a candle of sorrow, please, for the passing of someone very dear to a lot of people? I'm not sure if people in this church ever studied with Sid Simon, but he was in many ways the father of values clarification theory and a great personal friend and mentor. Thankfully, he lived a long life, so less tragic than other deaths I talked about recently. And a candle of joy for my resilient child who weathered yet another incredibly hard kind of body and heart blow and just somehow finds inner strength. And I'm so grateful she trusts me to be open and talk through these things and seems to find her father helpful.
I'd like to invite, this is my uncle Norman Porter, who's I'm grateful to have here today with us. And I've known him for 20 plus years and a good friend as well.
Good morning, my name is Russ. Could you light a candle, 2 candles? First one, joy. I called Marty Ortiz at the Buckley where she lives now. And she answered the phone. It's the first time that I've called her that she answered the phone. We had a nice talk a couple of days ago. She's making friends there and she's in a choir and a book group there that they're reading out loud to each other. And that was nice to hear. And some of you might remember Marty. She used to be a member here. She doesn't have computer access, so she can't see the services online. And the other candle, sorrow. Like a lot of people, I'm affected by things I hear and read in the news. And this morning, I was just feeling so weighted by so many things that I was hearing. And And I'm not expecting anything from anybody, but I wanted to take the opportunity to speak, get it out loud where other people could hear. Thank you.
I think we all fall into the category of people affected by the things we hear and see.
I'd like to point about people trying to imagine the future and being dead wrong most of the time of what happiness is. I had the good fortune to be cured from chronic depression. And one time I was sitting in a restaurant eating a meal in a booth. And I overhear a conversation which is a little louder right behind me. There is a guy talking to a woman, and he's talking about ending his life. Right? So I do, it's totally uncharacteristic. I jump up, I go over there, I interrupt, and I basically say to him, I understand, you're in a depressed place and everything looks dark, but you've ruled out serendipity. Great things can happen unexpectedly. So that's part of what you were saying. One more comment. I'm in a happy place myself today because I'm about to kick off a project which could go very well. But I know that it's not going to go like I expect. And so I'm ready for that, the ups and downs.
Couple candles of sorrow. The folks up at Row Camp and Conference Center, a whole family just got COVID, and now they're locked in their building. And then in a couple of days, I go for my endocardiogram, so I'm of course totally worried, mad about that. And I guess I have a joyful one is like all the computer stuff like you guys see me do here. I've been doing more and more of it, and it's starting to kind of build up. So I'm happy about that. And there you go, short and quick.
We have people on Zoom that want to make comments or no? Okay. Could we light one final candle for all that remains unsaid, and just a particular thought for the people who don't have communities like this one, to lean into, and people trapped in difficult situations, and then one more candle.
Actually, this is not a candle. I'm cheating. I waited till the end, but my name is Andrew Baker, and I confess I did not give you the title to my sermon next week. So here it is: Back to the Garden, revisiting our biblical origin story in a climate change era.
All right. Full candelabra of joys and concerns. We find strength in common purpose in one another, and we hold those thoughts in our hearts. Here's my prayer. To the creating and changing face of the present some call God, let's find a still spot for this. Others, the Spirit, Luke Skywalker calls the force. To the pronoun who is as elusive as we are neglectful, we lift up our hearts in this time, in this space. We as a people are wise that empathy for those outside ourselves is the foundation of morality. In that spirit, we seek understanding others. Mindful, as Paul noted, that being either a foot or a hand or an arm, we are of one body and part of much larger body. We look beyond ourselves for connection and meaning. Understanding, as America's own native people said, that to pluck one thing from nature is to feel the pull of its connection to all else. We train ourselves here on interdependence. And wise that at the end of the mystic's journey, is deep connection. We hope to find a restful place in the universe and be that place for others. Knowing that we are one of many sacred buildings speckled across the land, engaged in a similar thing today, we seek that this weekly worship space and the community that fills it be a special place of happiness for those that live out their days within its walls. We take that wish to just a moment of silence. Our closing words, our benediction is simple. Encourage people also to sit for the postlude. These are simple phrases I took from bumper stickers. Don't postpone joy. The more you know, the less you need. Go manifest your destiny. Dream and rudder your ships. And now the postlude followed by coffee hour. Thanks for being here today.
Well, that was interesting and thought provoking. I've actually been thinking about sort of this topic recently, because I consider myself generally happy. So it was interesting to hear this. I think about what motivates me to change and why it's sometimes hard to get me to do things that I think I should be doing, or even recognize that I probably need to be doing. I feel like it is because things are good, you know. And then so it's interesting. There was a really, I love his way of approaching it. The dialogue thing is always, I mean, you know, going back to Plato, always interesting approach.
Yeah, he really created that artifice that made it an interesting sermon, you know, it made it a story. By creating that dialogue out of thin air. Yeah, he's good.
Just asked us all those questions and it wouldn't have had anywhere near the same impact.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, I kept thinking about PQ because I've been doing it so long, and it'll be interesting for you to see if you think it complements what he just said. I think it does, because it's all about choosing and what's between your ears and under your heart and in your gut. In the end, your attitude. If you believe you're doing what makes you happy, you're more likely to be happy.
Hey, Tom. Hi, Gary. I'm actually want to play this for Christy later. I think you enjoy it. Yeah, I discussed the PQ aspect off this chat, but because nobody else will know what that's about. I will say though that just a quick thing to that. I think that my feeling, my being happy. It's a really interesting conundrum sometimes. I remember posing this to my Zen teacher many years ago, where I said, so if we're being present, being in the moment, how do we get our crops planted? How do we, earn income if that's what we're choosing to do? How do we make dinner? If we're in the moment, then we're not thinking about planting dinner or planting crops, which is a much more long-term, or looking at it from a permaculture standpoint, it's really long-term. It's sustainable.
Does that relate to the part of the story that Steve was telling where the importance